Temple students, but not for long. We have a senior high school student with us, Phoebe Potiker, who has been here at this temple, I think, she remembers since the 5th grade. Does that sound right, Mom and Dad? Okay. 3rd grade? No. Okay, somewhere in that, we'll have you argue about that later. But thank you, Betsy and Michael, for bringing Phoebe to us. We really appreciate you sharing her with us. And we really are sharing her because she's also the property of Shaker Heights High School. And they also benefit from her leadership. She is the student body president at Shaker Heights High. And she has also served in the soccer team for 4 years as the captain, the girls' soccer team. She is a madrichim in our program. Madrichim is our teenagers, our leaders, and she is certainly one of those. And Rabbi Nosenchuk and I kind of came upon the same wonderful thought at pretty much the same time. We thought about who we wanted to speak at this Shabbat Atid service. And Rabbi Nosenchuk had heard you speak somewhere, I think. And you were talking a little bit about your thesis work in the International Baccalaureate program that you're doing. And I had heard that you were in Germany, and so we sort of put our heads together, and we made her an offer she couldn't refuse, which is asking her to speak to us tonight about her journey in Germany, and certainly being of the Jewish faith. That's a very unique and special thing. And so thank you for joining us, and I'll have you come on up and share a few words with our congregation. Thank you for agreeing to be here, Phoebe.
Okay. Prior to this summer, I had never left the country before. I had never gotten a passport because I had never had the need to get one. I had been on short airplane trips with my family and had gone to sleepaway camp that had lasted only a week, but had never left home for a substantial amount of time. So a month away from my family in a foreign country was miles outside of my comfort zone. I don't know if that made it more appealing or if that was the reason for the tangled ball of excitement and fear that was currently lodged in my throat as we got on a plane headed towards Munich, Germany. I go to Shaker Heights High School, and they are part of an exchange trip with the school in the rural town of Goslar, located right in the center of the beautiful Harz Mountains. One of the most life-changing opportunities I had been given by Shaker was the chance to explore and discover more about myself and my heritage through this trip. My grandma was also overjoyed when she heard about this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity because it was a chance for me to go back to her home. I was being welcomed into a place where she was forced to leave as a child. I was going to a place overflowing with the history of her father's family and the history of our people. There was little reason for me to be apprehensive about taking this journey because I was being greeted with open arms by a new host family and 21 new friends. I had never felt like being Jewish in Germany was a negative factor. The difference from the Germany I experienced and the one which my grandmother lived through were practically two different countries. In the times when I felt most connected to Judaism were the times where I could picture my grandmother standing next to me and telling me about her story. We went to a Holocaust monument in Berlin where 2,711 giant, perfectly symmetrical concrete cubes stretched over 4.7 acres, towering over each one of us. This maze of stone was almost suffocating when I, at a short height of 5 feet 3 inches, was trapped between two 15-foot blocks of immobile rock. The emotions came over me were not joy and nor were they comfort. It was an uneasy atmosphere, and the silence you had with your thoughts allowed me to think of the differences between my life and my grandmother's. At 6 years old, my only worry was the math worksheet that was due tomorrow in elementary school. But when my bubby was 6, she was in an unfamiliar country, speaking a language where she didn't even know how to say hello. She was in the United States with her brother and her parents, with constant feelings of discomfort and fear that I had felt unlike never before in the middle of that monument. The feeling of being trapped was contrasted with my emotions as we entered Dachau. This concentration camp's purpose was for the forced labor of Jews, but by its time of liberation, it had evolved into a place for both imprisonment and extermination. It was the first to open its doors in Germany in the year 1933, and by 1945, when the prisoners were released, had documented over 32,000 deaths. Dachau was the longest operating concentration camp and had been open nearly the entire time of the Nazi regime's reign. There was a similar eerie silence to the monument in Berlin, but this time the silence was not confined to space between the concrete. The silence stretched among the grounds of a sandy and deserted graveyard. Most of this experience was repelling and made me severely uncomfortable to the point where I couldn't really walk around the living quarters without feeling like I shouldn't have been there. The living quarters of the prisoners were restricting. There were endless rows of beds where one had to lay face up and immobile while you were sleeping. The sky-high barbed wire fences which encompassed the camp were still intact, but many of the buildings were outlined only in plywood from where they used to be. These parts of the camp opened pieces of me that I had never really known existed. These parts that couldn't comprehend what I was surrounded by and what had truly taken place where I was standing. But other parts were hauntingly beautiful in a way. I think this came from the feeling of deep remorse that came from every German who I met that found out I was Jewish. Now I think this time period is taught in schools like slavery is taught to young American students. They feel this burden on their history that is not so easily repaired by words of sorrow roped around a commemorative placard. I'm still reeling from some of the deep emotions that I felt while walking around these grounds, but my main point is that they were not felt alone. I traversed the campgrounds in silence, but felt a constant sense of community. There was a support system in every aspect of my life, and my family is my base. My school and my teachers who would give anything and everything to help me in my time of need. This temple who has given me the opportunity to be Jewish while still asking questions, still being open-minded and respecting of others' opinions and perspectives. And now this new group of friends who I met in Germany, who I will never leave out of this ongoing list of influential people that have strongly affected my life. Now the students from Goslar are currently in Shaker, soon to be headed to DC and New York City, and most are staying with the American that they hosted while they were over here. And most of the Americans involved in this exchange are seniors. I think we are all recognizing that they came of a high time of stress for each American. College applications are due next week, the first quarter just came to a close, and teachers, while most are understanding, have not really lessened our workload. One day, my economics teacher was trying to ingrain in our minds that school should not be a checklist, that what we are learning, we should feel driven to understand concepts, to take part in discussions, and to not look at school like a list of assignments to be checked off our never-ending to-do list. I think every high school student understands what a goal-oriented society we live in. It's difficult to indulge yourself in learning for the sake of learning when most of us, the little time we have after homework and school is finished, is used for socializing and seeing our friends so we can, as a group, complain about school. But this is something that was not going on in Germany. There was a constant learning experience. Some was obvious teaching, for example, the bike tours, which showed us around both Berlin and Munich, the beautiful and intricate churches where we were showed how rich a country's history can be when it was founded before the 18th century, and of course the constant stream of language which we were hearing and actually understanding. I think by the end of this trip, students who had been mostly in their third year of German were thinking in their second language. There was this type of learning, but there was also the type of learning that was not so factual. On this trip, I was introduced to people who I had classes with for many years, but never talked to because our friendship circles had never intertwined. I was in a completely new environment with some very close friends and others who I had only known their name. This trip usually only allows under 15 students, but my group consisted of a bursting 21, and I truly believe that a vital aspect would have been missing had any one of these students not been included. There were nights in the hotel in Berlin and the hostel in Munich where we would stay awake talking for hours. There was one particular night in Berlin when we were all crammed into one of the tiny little hotel rooms after a World Cup viewing and had sat in a circle just sharing. We shared our pasts and our problems and our struggle that each of us had persevered through. Each of us being a group of incredibly hardworking students have definitely had bumps and hard times. At this point in the trip, everyone was comfortable and everyone was vulnerable, and there was a connection shared that I don't think could have ever taken place in the States. But as we flew back at the end of the month-long journey, it was unfathomable that I wouldn't be able to see every one of their faces every day. This group had become a family and a place where I hadn't had an immediate one. As I think about leaving for college next year, I can only dream about building the same friendships that I had built through this trip. I will again be learning in a new environment with new people, but this time around I am not the same person as when I stepped onto that plane to Munich in June. I've become the kind of person who lives to listen to people's stories because so often there is so much to hear from everyone. I've been influenced by every single person on that trip, and everyone has showed me a new way of looking at something. I think my life right now is based on learning from my surroundings while I am still in them. When I leave my family to go to college in a little